just as I was wondering what to do with my tired old exterior trim, Turtle Wax goes and drops a new product specifically designed to take care of exactly that. So stick around to see me thoroughly clean, strip and treat some 10-year-old plastic to try and give it a new lease of life. So while I don't often make videos based around one specific product, I've been wanting to address the tired exterior plastic on my own motor for a while now, and had recently received a bundle of complimentary new products from Turtle Wax, including a semi-permanent trim restorer, so thought why not put something together featuring that being used on my little Honda's 10-year-old trim to hopefully bring it closer to the finish of the surrounding aftermarket gloss black stuff instead of having it match my muddy dog walking boots. The product itself is a pigmented liquid graphene acrylic coating which thoroughly recolours trim while remaining resilient to washing and seasonal exposure. And to make for a more in-depth video, as well as to make things a bit more inconspicuous for me, as I really don't enjoy trying to create content out front here where I'm exposed to every passing animal, vegetable and mineral, thought it might be worth removing the trim to thoroughly treat it within the private confines of the ramshackle shed out back instead. Now, before any public stripping of discoloured components could be carried out, they needed to be thoroughly cleaned first, which I figured because I was giving the rest of the car a wash made sense to do while it was still firmly affixed. And while assuming the trim isn't too deeply ingrained with years worth of grot, which this relatively well kept stuff wasn't, you can just wash it over with a mitt and some pure shampoo. I think if you go into the trouble of trying to properly restore your trim, it makes sense to treat it to more of a dedicated clean with something like an all-purpose cleaner, a citrus degreaser or even a traffic film remover provided it's thoroughly rinsed off, which once applied should be thoroughly worked into the grain of it with an appropriate brush. And while I just used a super soft one here, feel free to step up to a more traditionally bristled item if the stuff you're working on needs a bit more bite. With all of the trim cleaned, rinsed and dried off, I then set about steadily removing it with the exception of the bits surrounding the wing mirrors, which weren't going anywhere without them and the door cards coming off. And while I wouldn't normally do this just to apply a restorative product, thought it might make things a bit more interesting for you, so went ahead and detached most of it. And with this being my own car, if I snapped any clips or lost any plastic poppers in the process, then that's just the price I'd have to pay. But thankfully, aside from the rear mudguards which needed yanking free as the 10-year-old screws had welded themselves to the brackets inside the bumper, most of the 10-year-old trim came off without too much hassle. Once successfully removed then, I treated all of the trim to a further wipe down with a couple of panel prep type products in the cramped utility room, just to strip any remaining grease, oil or fingerprints that either the previous clean had missed or the removal process had left. And any kind of prep product will do so long as it fully flashes off and essentially leaves the surface naked, as that's what will promote the strongest and hopefully most durable adherence of the product. And apologies for any grainy shots from here on in, as my 1500 quid 4K dedicated video camera is absolutely useless in anything other than perfect natural light. Now, before cracking on with the Turtle Wax Trim Restorer blind, I did test it off camera on a few bits first just to get a feel for it. And as you can see, it definitely serves to blacken things up. The only problem I encountered, which I wouldn't have if I bothered to read the bottle, is that it's only really intended for use on textured trim, which explains why I was chasing my tail trying to achieve a streak-free finish on a few of the smooth pieces. but now that I'd gone to the trouble of removing it all, thought I'd still go ahead and treat most of it as best I could. So Turtle Wax recommends either a foam applicator pad like the one I had here, or a microfiber towel for application, and for the product to be worked over the surface using both circular and linear motions, which tells me it's the trim itself that will dictate the best course of action. When I tried a bit of both here, settled on generally following the lines of the piece, which I just felt made sense. But this stuff is intended to be layered up, so you could provide some initial coverage using circular motions, for example, then finish up with a second or third linear applied layer, but it's basically going to come down to whatever floats your trim's boat on the day. There's no buffing required with this particular product, so once it's been applied, that's pretty much that, and while it will level out a bit, it's also up to you, the shed, garage, unit or driveway application technician, to finesse it to a point where you're happy with how it looks. And despite being designed to be extremely durable, you haven't got to wait around for hours on end for things to cure or worry about freshly treated trim getting wet soon after application, as it dries in about 5 minutes flat. I decided to take things beyond the simple swipe application here with a detail brush or two, which were used to work some of the pigmented product into the easily overlooked details of the front cowling, as there's no point pulling it off the car only to have contrasting spits and spots of grey and black once refitted, so although a bit tedious, would hopefully be worth the extra few minutes once done. I then finished up with the loose stuff outside in the natural light to ensure it was looking as uniform as possible prior to being refitted, as the car doesn't reside in a strip lit shed, so worked a final layer over before leaving it all to sit for half an hour while I headed back out front to tackle the last bits of undetached grey plastic around the wing mirrors. Now unfortunately, despite being in need of a good recolouring, the finish of these parts wasn't really textured enough to be able to achieve a nice non-streaky finish, but thought I'd give them a good going over regardless, as doubt they'd end up looking any worse. And while it wasn't a particularly easy undertaking with the mirrors still in situ, it at least gave me the opportunity to show that if you're treating trim on a car with this product, as I suspect the vast majority of users will be, then any unsightly excess smudges and smears on the surrounding glass or paintwork, which are kind of inevitable, can be taken care of with a damp cloth so long as you don't let them properly dry. So before the winter sun went down, I then got to work quickly refitting the freshly treated loose trim, which for the most part was a pretty straightforward affair, slotting and popping back into place with a bit of light persuasion. However, a forceful bodge was required to get the rusty screwed rear mudguards back into and onto the bottom of the rear bumper, but once there they no longer stuck out like a faded sore thumb. Up front, the previously unsightly grey cowling was now boasting a new darkened lease of life thanks to the Turtle Wax stuff, and the bits surrounding the wing mirrors, despite being too smooth to effectively treat, still looked a damn sight better for a few cack-handed layers of acrylic. And while the finish on some of the 10-year-old trim wasn't exactly perfect, considering how flat parts of it looked before, would still class it as a successful rejuvenation. Now obviously I can't comment on durability at this point, but if it does what it says on the pigmented tin, I shouldn't have to concern myself with reapplication anytime soon. And if you don't mind a bit of mess in return for a dark, potentially durable replenished finish, then it might be worth giving this stuff a try on your tired old trim too. So let me know what you think before naffing off. Does recolouring faded trim like this help to give an aging motor a new lease of life, or is it just too much of a messy faff for too little in return? Whatever your thoughts though, cheers for tuning in once again, and I'll be back as soon as I can with some cleaning action on something other than my own car.